All right, let's go ahead and get started. It is 7:03. Good evening. My name is Val Walters. I'm the Executive Director of the Ryan Bartell Foundation. Thank you all for joining us this evening for another really important conversation about youth mental health, specifically as it relates to competitors, whether they're athletes or competitive performers, and the importance of being in touch with their mental wellness. So we've got a great group of panelists today. Who are either going to share their resources. We will come back with you all and email you all the resources from tonight's call. And again, as it's being recorded, you can go back to our website and view it at a later time or share it with someone else who might want to be in tune with these types of resources. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator, board member, Mental Health Advisory Board Chair, Denisha Hamilton, to go ahead and start moderating this session. And at the end, we'll be sure to share a quick survey, get your feedback on tonight's program and maybe some suggestions for future programs, as well as tell you about some upcoming programs that we have going on later this month and into December. Denisha?
Thank you, Val. So everyone, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us this Thursday evening. I am Denisha Hamilton, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work as a mental health therapist here in Loudoun County. And as Val said, I do a lot of work for the Ryan Bartell Foundation, one of them being the pleasure of moderating these conversations once a month. Like Val said, I think that these conversations are so important and give us just a different perspective on how we look at mental health and how we support teen mental health. I will have all of the panelists introduce themselves. If you all have any questions during our panel conversation, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat and we will get to everyone's questions as quickly as we can. So Lynn, I will go ahead and start with you.
Super. Thanks, Denisha, and thanks for the invitation, Val. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Lynn Hennighausen, and I come to you from near Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a national trainer for a program called Youth Mental Health First Aid, which is an evidence-based training that teaches adults who support youth, how to notice if a young person may be experiencing signs and symptoms of a mental health challenge, how to step in with confidence and ask some questions, and then how also to be resource ready when the need for resources arises as well. I am married with 3 adult kids, and I was a college athlete, 2-sport athlete many years ago, and so I understand the role that coaches and the team around the team plays in the lives of our young people. All 3 of our kids, who are adults now, played sports from rec to elite. And just this morning, I sent them a text in the family chat and said, so when you think about me as a parent of you as an athlete when you were growing up, what's the best thing I did for you? And what's the worst thing I did for you? And our 2 oldest sons played hockey. So as a little bit of context, my husband traveled a lot, and all 3 of our kids were very involved. And one day I took one of my kids to hockey practice, only to find out that I took the wrong kid to hockey practice. And so our oldest, CJ, in the family text said, the best thing you ever did, Mom, or the thing I liked the most, was when you drove me to practices and games. The things I hated the most is when you took someone else to my practice. So with that, I will pass the baton.
Thank you for that, Lynn. Donna.
So I'm Donna Rogers. I am co-founder and president of an organization called Morgan's Message. We created that organization after we lost my daughter, a sister, a granddaughter, a niece, a friend, and a teammate, Morgan, to suicide in 2019. We created this organization in 2020. Morgan was a Duke University women's lacrosse player. She did not battle mental health struggles her whole life. She wasn't in and out of hospitals. She really suffered in silence. It started all after a devastating knee injury, about to start her sophomore year season in college at Duke. So We started this organization to try to be there for the Morgans that are out there today. Morgan suffered in silence. She felt very alone. She really felt like there was no one that could understand what she was going through. And we thought sharing stories would have been so critical to Morgan's story, Morgan's journey. She wrote a lot of things down, and she really did feel very isolated. Even though it wasn't that long ago, mental health, the conversation that surrounds it really has changed significantly. And I credit that to partly the pandemic that we went through. But we really feel like we're trying to move the needle here when it comes to the stigma that surrounds mental health. So this organization was created just for that purpose, to save the other Morgans out there. Personally, 3 children. Morgan was a twin. They have an older brother that's about 2 years older than them. So we had 3 kids in 2 years. It was a very, very busy time. All 3 of them played college sports. We're a huge sports family. I was a college athlete for a little bit of time before an injury forced me into retirement as well. But yeah, so Morgan's Message, this organization, we're just trying to change the dialogue here. We're trying to normalize these conversations and really move the needle when it comes to the topic of mental health.
Thank you, Donna. And Tara.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tara. I'm a current senior on the William and Mary lacrosse team, and we play Duke every year, actually. And I'm also a campus ambassador for Morgan's Message. So me and a few other teammates run some meetings every couple of weeks on campus to try to continue normalizing that conversation around mental health. I personally, like as a Division I athlete, as a competitor, have faced some obstacles and struggles around mental health. And through having a really strong support system and reaching out, asking for help, and having some healthy coping mechanisms to fall back onto, I've been able to handle those obstacles and have become an advocate for mental health in my own environment. So my goal is just to continue trying to normalize that conversation within my ecosystem. And I'm just really grateful to be here. So I'm excited to continue this conversation.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Kelly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Pollard. I am in Loudoun County, Virginia as well. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am also a track coach at one of the high schools in Loudoun County as we speak. I've been coaching for 6 years now. I'm the sprint coach. I have to say that our 4x100 team took the #1 in the state position last year, our boys team. So I have to just say hooray for that. I have been a social worker in various different capacities, but I've been in the social work field for 30 years. I have seen I've worked with children, adolescents, and adults. So I'm very aware of the mental health crisis that is going on, and I was asked to be here as a coach perspective. So I will try to keep my social work hat tucked away at this time, but I think it'll be hard because I think mental health is one of those things that is very near and dear to my heart, and I work hard to having.
So I will wear the social work hat for both of us tonight, Kelly. So I am very, very excited to have this conversation. And Donna, I'm actually going to start with you because you mentioned something that I think we really just need to go ahead and throw it out there and let's start talking about it. So we know that stigma is probably the main reason that more than 50% of individuals do not seek help for mental health challenges. We know that access to services and the financial component of services also impacts it. But what are some ways that as parents, we can break down the barriers at home, at school, and in the competitive environment so that we are normalizing those conversations about mental health?
Well, now remember, I am not a clinician by any means. I come here with just real life experience.
And that's perfect.
Obviously, I have analyzed every minute of my life with Morgan when she was here. And honestly, we didn't talk about mental health at the dinner table. We had very busy schedules and we always met up for dinner. It could have been at 4:30 before a game. It could have been at 10 o'clock at night after the games, but we always met up for dinner. It was one of the rules that we had, all of us. We talked about everything. We talked about sex. We talked about drugs. We talked about bullying. We talked about pregnancy. I mean, anything under the sun except mental health. It wasn't something that was avoided. It wasn't a taboo subject. We just didn't know. We did not talk about it only because we just didn't feel the need. It never came up. And of course, I regret that, but I also don't blame ourselves for that because no topic was off topic. I mean, no topic was off limits for us. And we were, pretty openly about everything. But I think people have asked me this all the time. I do believe that today, with the emergence of professional athletes or professional actors or professional singers, the ones that come forward and share their experience and their journeys really is a nice segue to open up that conversation with kids at any age. Unfortunately, you open up the newspapers, you watch the news. A lot of times there's a tragedy that can be discussed at the dinner table, but not all the time. Sometimes it's someone that's taking a step back from their profession. And that is a great opportunity to bring it up and just say, hey, did you hear that so-and-so? Did you hear that Michael Phelps suffered from depression? What do you think about that? I don't believe that there's an age too young to bring up any topic of mental health. There's no age too young to bring up physical ailments. You talk about cancer, you talk about COVID, so many different physical issues are brought up and no one hesitates. No one's afraid. No one's uncomfortable. You just bring it up. And the topic of mental health has to be seen the same way. So I just recommend to people that there is no too early of an age appropriate, of course, modeling behavior. Let's tell people how you are feeling that day. When you've had a mental health struggle, be open with it. And then that relays to the kids to know that you're going to be open to talking about something if they're going through it, maybe by the time they are in teenage years, and they will already know that you as parents are very open to talking about absolutely anything, mental health included.
I'll jump in. Thanks, Donna. I think that's so critical, the making it okay to have the conversations. Another role I play is co-founder of a company called Whole Health Sport. And we use curricula like youth mental health first aid to springboard conversation among coaches and what we call team around the team. One of the things we spend a lot of time talking about is how do we normalize that conversation from the beginning? So things like, what's a 2-word check-in, right? We could do that at the dinner table. We can do that at a team practice, right? And a young person might say excited and scared, right? And then the next person goes, and that's it. But you know what? Then as a coach or a parent, I can follow up and say, I'm so glad that you're excited. Tell me more about being scared. Right? How can I support you in being scared? Because we know emotions are just pieces of data, right? They're pieces of information that we can use to continue the conversation. So we got to start way upstream as our kids are learning to talk, to be able to name emotion, to be able to talk about emotion, so that when something is not going well, it's okay to talk about that too.
Yeah, I really think that normalizing that conversation and making it okay to talk about your feelings is something that is so important from the student or the child perspective too. I know for me, like Morgan's Message became that space for me my freshman year of college, excuse me, where I was hearing other people talk about having some struggles, and then it made it okay for me to struggle because I never felt that it was okay for me to even have these issues and feel anything but being a happy kid. And so I think that is such an incredible place to start. Parents and coaches, if you're not feeling 100%, tell people, because that makes it okay for us to not feel 100%. Check in with us. And that's something I think spreads really quickly. Like I found on my team that if I speak about my anxiety being a little bit overwhelming one day, somebody else the next day will feel more confident to say that as well. Or if I talk about today in therapy, I did this, somebody will feel maybe a little bit more okay with maybe I want to go to therapy. So it snowballs in a really positive way.
One thing I'd like to add is that I think that we all have this idea that everything everybody said is a good way to go. But one thing that we can do is when we hear people say things like, oh, she's crazy, or and people use those derogatory terms, if we can just be brave and say, oh, that's a really harsh word. Please don't use that word around me. If you say something like that, the person learns that you are not going to listen to that word, or it's not acceptable for you. And then maybe they'll recognize that it's not acceptable for them as well. It's just something I've picked up on.
So that's changing the language, right? The language around the stigma, which adds to the stigma. We actually tell all of our ambassadors and actually all of our community, it starts with language. That old term of, I know this is the extreme part of the mental health, but the old term of committing suicide is out the door. I mean, like it still amazes me when I hear people say that term, and we constantly educate people about the term is died by suicide or death by suicide. And I think that's such a simple tweak to your language that absolutely anyone can make that will also help eliminate the stigma that surrounds some serious mental health issues.
And I also think like it's become okay to use like pathology in our everyday dialogue, right? It's my anxiety instead of I feel, right? What am I feeling? I am not anxiety, right? And so, or the weather is so bipolar. One of the things that I love talking about is first person language, that we are more than any diagnosis we could possibly have. Right. And so when we talk about schizophrenic, someone who is bipolar, an addict, or an alcoholic, that means that that is all that person is. So someone who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, right, that's one piece of a much more complex human. And that's really important to continue to talk about.
You guys did amazing with the first question. I'm so excited about this conversation. Lynn, you said something that I wanna piggyback on. So you talked about, I actually wrote it down, but I love the 2-word check-in and asking the question of how can I support you? Because I think that's also a new way of parenting. I think for as great as my mom was, I don't actually remember her using language like that. And one of the questions that I want us to talk about now is, we know that as parents, we have good intentions, like no matter what we're saying, we want the best for our children. So what are some ways that we support our young competitors, either in the car on the way home, as you all started talking about at the dinner table? I love that. But let's say, how do you snag some of those opportunities to start having those conversations? And what does support even look like?
So I've been thinking a lot about this, and the self-reflection hasn't been all great for me, right? As a very competitive person who saw what my own kids could do. And so some really hard self-reflection. What I read today was that, like in Major League Baseball, the 10 minutes after a game are media free and manager free. And when our kids get into a car, that same space can be so empowering. So our young people then have an opportunity to reflect first about how they feel. And then using phrases like, I love watching you play. I love watching you play. How cool is that? Or focusing on the positive. I saw what a wonderful teammate you were in the dugout today. Gosh, I'm proud of you. And if they want to have conversation, if our kids want advice, they'll ask us, right? What did you think how can I get better at? Right. So creating those open spaces, those safe spaces where our kids aren't thinking we're going to start by saying things like, that was a really crappy play, or you sure didn't do your best today, did you? Right? Those aren't super safe messages that we're sending our kids.
So
And
as a coach, I just want to say that on days that we have meets, there's no coaching that happens on days that there's meets. Because they are in their game mode and they have all that, they have their order and they have their things they have to do. And so if we see something, we don't bring it up in that day. We wait until the next day when we have practice to bring it up. And it's very similar to what you're saying, Lynn. You have to give that safe space. And oftentimes I will ask an athlete, so are you interested in what I have to say? Because sometimes they're not, and they need more time, or they want to hear about it as they're walking out the door, so they're not they don't have to sit on it all practice. So giving them the option, are you interested? Would you like some feedback on how things went today from my perspective, or how things went yesterday? So yes, totally agree, Lynn.
And I'll also jump in and say, if you are a parent that has used this language, please do not beat yourself up. We started this conversation with, we are all well-intentioned when we are talking to our kids. So the purpose of this conversation is, if you are doing that, we are giving you some other techniques in order to change how you have those conversations. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because sometimes I feel like it gets a little heavy and I don't want it to feel very finger pointing at parents.
No.
Right. That car ride home can be difficult. And so you have to let them set the tone.
And I also think, like, when I think back and I think about the work that I'm doing in youth mental health first aid, just creating the space, noticing what might be happening, stepping in, right, at appropriate times to say, are you okay? Here's what I've noticed. I've noticed you are sitting with your friends in the dugout. I've noticed that you seem to set yourself apart at swim meets, right? So noticing and creating these soft spaces. And I think we also have to think about the values, right? So why do we want our kids to play sports or be other performers in whatever they choose, right? So what's in it for me? Where's the ego? And how can I set aside my ego, because it doesn't really matter in the life of my young person? And then what are the values, the family values that we buy into when it comes to sport, when it comes to how coaches coach and how we show up and how we behave?
Yes, I completely agree. And I think from like sitting in the car on the opposite side and experiencing that, I think it also spans more than just that car ride home. Because like you were saying, Lynn, like if I can ask for feedback, and I, as somebody who likes in that car ride, I would always ask for, okay, what do I need to work on? Because I'm in lacrosse mode, I'm in sport mode. But as soon as I leave that, I also want to know that I'm worth more than my skill, than my sport, than whatever I'm doing at that competitive level. And I think it starts with also making sure that that everything you're talking about is not just the thing that might be the most prominent in your life. So for me, it's lacrosse. I want to have a conversation outside of that. I don't want the only thing that we have in common to be this skill that I've had for X amount of years, because at one point it will end or it will change. And I think that's conversation's really important, that, you know what, let's check in when I want to hear the lacrosse talk, the sports talk, the competitive talk, but also let's talk about other things. Let's, ask me about my day or how our class is going, or, tell me you're proud of me for being a good person, not just getting a good grade or doing well in my game. I think that's really important for the student athlete or the competitor, just to hear it, because we know that our parents care, but sometimes we just need to hear it repeated, because it can be hard and it can be overwhelming, and our brains are still kind of young. So we're not exactly sure how to process all the information.
I very much appreciate you saying that. And I'm super appreciative of you being here and having 4 different perspectives on this one issue. So thank you so much I think it's so important for competitors to feel like they're more than that one thing. They're more than just grades. They're more than a performer. They're more than an athlete. So again, thank you. I think that really hit home for a lot of people. I would like to ask for our next question, and Kelly, I'm gonna start with you this time. So as a parent, if we are noticing that our child is a little overwhelmed or beating themselves up, or let's say they didn't perform as well as they hoped and they're falling into a rut, how do we support them?
Right. So I guess overwhelmed and feeling that they're in a rut might be two different things. So being overwhelmed, we have to remember that the whole reason they're at school is to study and get an education. And so that really does take the priority. I have often had competitors come to me and say, I can't come to practice today because I have an AP test history. And they, fine, you go ahead, you go home, you study. Don't worry about this because we'll be here tomorrow. And, they're like, should I work out tonight? And well, maybe if you have time, go for a run, do something like that, but it's not your priority. So we have to prioritize things. The second part of that question has escaped me. Can you repeat it, Tanisha?
I have no idea, Kelly. I just throw stuff out there. So if anyone remembers what I said,
No.
that
Okay. Right. Yeah. So when they're overwhelmed, it's important to recognize that when people get overwhelmed, when competitors and athletes get overwhelmed, it's important to prioritize. And sometimes people need to pull back from things and take a break. And I think too, like even myself, when I've had, I've been sick and I have a job and I'm coaching and I have a side hustle because I do other things. I'm very, very busy. I have 19-year-old twin boys myself, Donna. So I know how it is, what that is. I'll have to take a day where I just kind of sleep in a little bit, regroup, prioritize what needs to be done. And I do what I can. So everybody needs to take a day or an hour to figure out what's most important. And oftentimes when you're able to look at that list, whatever you've prioritized, there are some things you can step back from for an hour or a day or a few days. Not everything is as important as we think it is. And I think as parents, it's important for us, like you said, Lynn, to put that ego down and to recognize that my children are not me. My goals are not their goals. They have things they want to accomplish, and they're very different from what I might want them to accomplish. And when we recognize that, we can be very, very helpful because we recognize that it's not about us, it's about them. In answer to whatever question you had.
Well, and I was thinking one of the questions you had mentioned was, how can you support your kids when they are overwhelmed or whatever the other word was you chose. I think we take it for granted, the skill of listening. 9 out of 10 times, well, first of all, when you have children, you basically want to listen to them and then fix their problems when they're younger. As they get older, they really don't want you to fix their problems. They want you to hear their problems more than anything. Listening is a skill that is not as easy as it sounds. We as human beings tend to talk to someone one-on-one, and as the other person is speaking, I'm still guilty of it. I work on it every day. I am thinking of what my response is going to be when it's my turn to talk. That's not really 100% listening. Now, I'm older, so I'm not sure what the reason is, but then I forget what I was going to say if I totally focus on what I'm talking about. However, I think there's value in it because it typically comes back around again. But I think listening is so critical, and it seems like such a common, easy, natural thing. It's not. And it's okay to admit that I'm not a good listener, but I'm willing to work on it because I know that's what I do every day. I try to work on it.
And Donna, I would piggyback on that to say not only listening, but just validating, just saying, oh, that sucks. It's okay to just say, oh, that sucks.
Or I don't know.
Perfect.
I don't know.
And I really love that you put out there that so often as parents, we want to fix the problem. And sometimes fixing the problem is just jumping into the ugly with them and just hearing them out. Because so often what I hear from teenagers is that they just don't feel heard, and they feel like their problems are being dismissed. And so just the listening, the validating, the encouragement, that goes so far.
And I think one of the values that we often talk about is the value of the really important value that I'm thinking about right now that I can't remember. It's the most profound value. Agency, that we give our young people agency, right? That we have, part of our role as parents is to help our kids trust themselves. And so if I step in when someone I care about, a young person I care about, if I step in really quickly to fix something, the message the young person is getting is, wow, she doesn't think I can do it, right? So giving our young people agency. If a young person has to talk to a coach or another performance coach of some sort, right? That's our young people's. That's their conversation to have. It's not our conversation to fix. So I can support. One example that I can give in my own life is I have our middle son was 5'6" when he was a freshman in high school, and he played basketball, and he wasn't getting much playing time, and so he was very stressed about that. He was very upset, and my husband and I kept saying, ask your coach what you can do to improve. Like, how can you get more playing time? Scared to death. Eventually he did. And unfortunately, the coach said, grow, right? Which was not helpful. And Ricky learned a lot from it and is now 6'4". So, giving our kids agency, trusting that they can figure it out is a really important piece of all of this, because that's one of the attributes that sport gives us.
And
I'd like to just add one sentence to that, is that there is a dignity in failure. A lot of people try to take that from their children, and there's a dignity in allowing people to fail, because that is where a lot of growth can happen, is in failure, not so much in success. So
yeah, I'm thinking of just one actionable item that really helps me. And I know I try to implement in my life, which is when you're going into a conversation that maybe somebody's like, oh, I'm so frustrated about this. Stopping and asking, what do you need from me? Because sometimes I do want an answer. Like when my dad was fixing my resume, I said, Dad, I need your help and I need you to help me understand this. But sometimes when I'm coming to a problem, especially when I'm overwhelmed, and I think a lot of people feel this way, it's sometimes just so hard to articulate being overwhelmed that all I need is somebody to listen so I can work through it and kind of talk at you. And then I can ask for the response and say, okay, do you have any advice? But I think starting that conversation with, what do you need from me? Because then it gives agency to the person who's coming to you, and also makes it just a much more equal, more important conversation. It's a lot easier to have that conversation when I know the answer I'm going to get is what I need right now. If it's a listener, if it's advice, if it's a shoulder to cry on, I know I'm going to get what I need. And so then I feel more like I'm able to say what I want to say more easily too, because I know I'm not going to be fighting or trying to kind of get my point across.
Okay, so I warned you guys that I was going to go a little rogue. So get ready. Here we go. So this conversation, I think, assumes that we have nice, calm teenagers that are going to communicate with us effectively if we practice good communication skills with them. We know that most teenagers think that their parents are the dumbest people on this planet. So let's say my kid, no matter how nicely I communicate with them, they're not coming and talking to me. I know they're going to talk to their friends. I'm not really sure what that advice might look like. So how can we, one, not take that personally as a parent, but also make sure that our competitors have a support system that includes other adults that we do trust, or at least that they trust, as well as their peers that we know they're going to go to?
I love this question. And I think it's critical to make sure that, or help ensure that our young people have what I call a squad. Who's in your squad, right? It might be a parent. I loved when it was me, and sometimes it wasn't me, right? It might have been my husband. It might have been a coach or an athletic trainer or a friend's parent or an athletic trainer or a sports psychologist, right? Or a therapist. But making sure that our young people know that it's okay with us as parents for them to trust other people in their lives. So having a squad, an adult squad, can be really helpful.
So I wrote this note down for myself like 10 minutes ago. If anyone has a question, feel free to ask the question, to unmute yourself or put it in the chat, or we'll just keep blabbing along. So I wanted to make sure I said that.
I think it's really important for people to get their children connected to therapists. I know it can be difficult, and if they are reaching a point where you feel that you are not able to help them as a parent, having someone like a therapist who can talk to the student about whatever's going on with them without having an agenda. As a parent, I had an agenda for my sons. I wanted them to do certain things at certain times at a certain rate. And that came across. I didn't always want it to, but it just does. And so when people have a therapist, someone that they talk to on a regular basis, even if it's like once a month, if they have someone who lets the child set the agenda, then they get their issues talked about, and they are hopefully getting good advice. And it just gives them a forum to talk about what they need to talk about, not necessarily what the parent needs them to talk about.
And piggybacking on what Kelly just said, I think back to when my kids were a little bit younger, they're in their mid-20s right now, upper 20s. They all had the personality, and maybe everyone does to a point. They wanted to be part of the solution. They didn't want to be told how to fix whatever was going on with them. And I think that also gives them a sense of respect when parents bring them into the conversation. Again, you probably can't do that with elementary school kids to the same extent that you can do with high school or college kids, but gauging it, but having them not be only come to you with a problem, but also be part of the solution. I think it really empowers them.
And I'll say from the mental health perspective that I have had so many teens and young adults that their reason for not going to their parents isn't because they don't think you won't listen or that you don't care. They don't want to be a burden. They feel like, I don't want to disappoint. My mom, my dad already has so much on their plate. So I think it's so important not to take it personally if they are going to someone else. So let's say you've noticed that your child is struggling a little bit. You know that a therapist or some other resource would be good for them. Where do you go? Who do you turn to? I think so often, and this is one of the reasons I love moderating these conversations, there are so many resources available that none of us know about. So if we could spend a little bit of time talking about, where do I even go to start this process? How do I start the process of talking to my child's coach or whoever that competitive leader is, especially when I want to give my child agency? How do I know how to find a therapist? Where do we go? Kelly, I'll pick on you for this one.
Okay. I think one of the best resources that people don't realize they have is actually a benefit that their employer provides them, which is an employee assistance program. Personally speaking, I have started therapy for both my sons, myself, my family, using the EAP because different employers offer it, and they often will have therapists who work just for that employee assistance program, and they can get you started in therapy, and you get 5 or 6 or 8 sessions complimentary. It's part of one of the benefits that companies offer. The next thing is, if you have commercial insurance, you call your insurance, and it can be daunting and you might be on the phone for a while, but they can give you a list of local providers who are accepting patients. And then you go through that. And then the other thing is if you're not insured, there are different things in Loudoun County There are places that are available who serve people without insurance, such as Loudoun County Mental Health Department of Substance Abuse and Developmental Services. HealthWorks is in Leesburg, and they have other places in Northern Virginia that offer services, mental health services to people without insurance. So there are resources out there. And unfortunately, because there's such an influx of people who are seeking treatment, you really do have to be the squeaky wheel. You have to be the one to call and leave a message. And when they don't call you back a week later, you really have to call them again, and then maybe again. But if you're interested in getting the services, once you get in there and you'll talk to someone, they'll tell you, well, I have an opening in 2 months. And so you talk to the next person. So you just really do have to be the squeaky wheel. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. There's such a lack of providers.
Can I shift just a tiny bit? I also think, especially with high performing people, that even if resources are available, there tends to be this real chasm between feeling like I should be able to handle everything. If I ask for help, it means that I'm weak. I don't want to tell a coach that I'm not feeling well, or that I'm hurt physically or mentally, right? I don't want to do any of that. And so we know that among NCAA competitors, about 10% of college athletes will seek help. 10%. And so we got to look at, what's it going to take? Like, how sick do we have to be? How hurt mentally do we have to be before we're able to say, you know what, coach, like, I'm having a hard time, right? So how do we make it okay to say, I'm not feeling great?
I think a lot of that goes back to normalizing the conversation. I know for me personally, it took me a really long time to think that it was even okay for me to go to therapy. And I really struggled in general with reaching out and asking for help when I needed it most. And it took me getting to a pretty dark place. And I had come during COVID, and I'd lost a friend, and I was in such a dark place that I realized, okay, nobody's going to help me if I don't reach out. But even after then, I still thought, okay, I can handle this on my own, because I've always been able to handle everything in my life on my own. And it took until this year as a senior where I realized, you know what, I wasn't experiencing something anywhere near as difficult as that. It was just that thinking about the future is really scaring me, and I don't know what to do about it. And I kept talking to my parents about it, and they weren't understanding, and they were trying to understand, but they couldn't. And so it kind of came through listening, like kind of hearing that I know people who are going to therapy who don't have major life crises or trauma or things that are happening, and they really enjoy it, and it's helpful for them. And I also am grateful because my parents' insurance plan covers it, and I'm very blessed in that way. But it just took hearing over and over again from my parents, from my coaches, from the people around me, that therapy is okay, and asking for help is okay, and that it doesn't make you weak, even if you are a high performer and if you are somebody who tries to do things on your own. And now on the other side of it, I couldn't be more grateful that I had finally took that step. It took me years. And now it's something I look forward to every week, and just to have that conversation and be able to say, I'm freaked out about the future, and somebody say, hey, that's okay. It's huge. But I think it's really hard to get to that point. So I think that's where it's really important to just continue advocating that it's not that big of a deal for starters to do something like that, to go to therapy, to get on medication, any of that. It's not that big of a deal. Like, you're going to be okay. It doesn't mean that you are a failure in any way. And just really continuing to prioritize it as a normal thing, just like you're treating a sprained ankle and getting it wrapped before practice. It's the exact same thing.
We are so proud of Tara being a Morgan's Message campus ambassador, but that is exactly why we started Morgan's Message. We're not therapeutic. We're not clinical. We don't pretend to be. We don't ask our ambassadors to take that role. What we're hoping to do is give them an opportunity before it gets to crisis mode to kind of find their way through the comfort of talking about their mental health, or looking at their mental health as, like Tara just said, just as important as their physical health. It's just not treated the same way. It's not spoken about, But over time, I tell the kids all the time, there was a time where we used to whisper the word cancer. They can't even believe that. They're like, really? I'm like, no, I'm telling you, I think that's going to be the way mental health is going to be talked about in the next generations. They're going to be shocked that mental health wasn't a topic that was easily discussed. So we have over 4,100 campus ambassadors, just like Tara out there, trying so hard to normalize these conversations. We're not fixing anything. We're trying to be this nice little bridge and get to these kids before it gets to any sort of crisis mode.
It's like that upstream thing.
Sorry, go
That
ahead.
upstream thing. If people if parents with young children could start and say, oh, I need to get some help with this and I need help with that. And as children learn from their parents, that it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to look to people who might be more skilled in certain areas. So it is okay to ask for help. And the more children see their parents or the people around them ask for help, the more it can be normalized. It's very similar. Sorry to interrupt you, Janisha.
No, that was great. I think the modeling is so important because so often we just have to practice what we preach. Because if our goal is to normalize these conversations, if our goal is to get rid of stigma, sometimes we are accidentally being part of the stigma. We're being part of that stuck mindset just by not putting that information out, saying, I had a really bad day. I think I just want to lay down for 20 minutes and not anything. My new favorite phrase is, I don't want to people today. Like I don't want to people. I don't want to talk to people. I don't actually want to function. Like I am peopled and humaned out. And I try to model that for my cousins. I try to model that for my husband, for my brother. Like, I just don't today, and that's okay. I think another phrase that I really try to push people to use is really thinking about what would you say to a friend. I think as younger people, we do have a lot of pressure on us, and we do think about, we set this expectation for ourselves that we would never set for any other person. And sometimes just stepping out of that and saying, okay, well, if Kelly and I were friends and Kelly came to you with this, would you tell Kelly she couldn't ask for help? Would you tell Kelly that this was a shameful thing or she should do better, pull herself together? And usually when I ask people that question, they're mortified because we would never say these things to another human. So sometimes if your child can't get out of their own head, just what would you say to your friend? Your friend Rick goes to see a therapist. You don't think anything is bad about that. So what would be wrong with, or why would it be bad if you did it? So Val is going to put the survey in our group chat. If you all could take a few minutes just to look at that. We're still going to keep talking, but from a foundation point of view, it helps to have those surveys completed. But one question I'd like for us to sort of start our wrap up with is, what would you all, I believe most of you have some sort of competitive background, but what would you say to your younger self as a competitor or to other competitors? Tara, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, I have so many things I would say, but probably the main points would be, first, being mentally tough isn't just pushing yourself into your limits until you break, or going as hard as possible and keeping it all in. A lot of being mentally tough, I personally think, and I've seen it be successful, is being vulnerable, reaching out when you need it, prioritizing your mental health, putting the work in on the field, in the classroom, and to yourself, working on yourself, helping yourself in the ways that you need, because you can only do so much if you don't have that energy, if you're not giving yourself the love that you need. And I've seen in my own life that I perform better in school, in lacrosse, across socially and everything, when I give myself what I need and I'm kind to myself. And secondly, that perfectionism is one of the worst things you can do for yourself, something I still really struggle with. And I know all high performers struggle with this, but we set these ridiculously high expectations for ourselves that we'll never meet, because nobody is perfect. And that's not a bad thing. But it's just, almost a crutch, perfectionism. And I think one of the strongest things that somebody can do is break away from that and instead focus on just trying your best. A lot of times that will result in what you want and getting what you want, but it starts from internally, and it's really difficult. And that's where that hard work has to come in. But we're used to putting that hard work in. We do it in the classroom, we do it on the field, we do it with whatever we're competitive at. So it's just kind of shifting that and putting it on yourself and saying, I'm going to be kind to myself if I don't get this right. I'm going to be kind to myself if I don't play well today, because I'm not going to catch every single ball today. I'm not going to get an A in every single class. That's not realistic. And that's okay. And I'm still going to be okay. And lastly, this is something I've heard recently from my therapist, actually, and I wanted to just echo it, that rest is productive, rest is a good thing. Rest does not mean you're lazy. Don't feel guilty for it. It just means that you're giving yourself the time to then perform at the level you want to perform at.
Thank you. That was awesome. Lynn, I'll pop over to you.
A couple things. One is you are not just a softball player, or you are more than a softball player. You are more than a volleyball player. You are a human who plays a sport, right? And my whole identity was caught up in whether I played well or whether I didn't play well. So that's one really big thing. And then just the other is, just have fun. You know, I think now I'm a great player now. I didn't play very much when I was a kid. It was all cost. So have fun.
Kelly.
So I would listen to myself. I would listen to my body. And when I have an internal thing that says, that internal voice you hear that says, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you've done enough today. Maybe you need to rest. I would listen to that more. And as an adult, I feel that I do.
And Donna.
Well, Lynn took my answer, but I'll just reiterate. It creeps up on you. I was an athlete my whole life, and it didn't really turn into who I was until high school. And then that's all I thought I was. I was a gymnast. And I would tell myself that I am so much more than that, because my career came to a screeching halt in college, and I was forced to learn that I was so much more than a gymnast. So I would go back a few years and tell myself that. I think it would have been helpful.
Thank you. So I just want to say, before I turn things back over to Val, that I am so appreciative of this conversation. And I think you gave all of us a lot to think about. I was not an athlete. I tried cheerleading for one season, and it was cold, and I was the smallest girl on the team. So I was the flyer, and I very quickly was like, yeah, this is not a Denisha thing. So I so appreciate the four of you. So back to you, Val.
I love that. I've got the image of you flying. I love that, Denisha. So thank you so much to our panelists, our speakers. What a great and interesting conversation. I've got one little piece that I want to add, and that is that as parents, as adult advisors, as friends, as mentors, we need to ensure that our athletes and our performers have healthy coping skills. Because that one injury that can take you out for a season or for the rest of your competitive career can really spiral. And I think that making sure that we have, we're informing, encouraging, teaching our young people to have those healthy coping skills that they can fall back on when they can't do their sport. Can really help in those moments when they can't compete. So, building that toolbox full of additional resiliency skills is really important. And that actually leads me into a quick note about our December Fort. Our forts are programs where we bring our middle schoolers and high schools students into a safe, caring space with qualified mental health professionals and workshop leaders, where they will learn a tangible skill. And our hope is that they will take that skill and be able to use it at a moment of stress or when they can't work out or when they can't do something. So in December, we've got some creative holiday end of the year yoga that's going to be going on. We're going to do I believe it was the Dream House gingerbread decorating contest with Lauren Katz, who's an amazing chef. And then we've got our friends from Knitwell that are coming back to teach a knitting workshop. And the hopes is that, you know, you can create a gift for somebody who's helped you out this year. So they're going to teach the kids how to do a little bit of knitting, and they're going to knit a scarf. So I'm going to put the link. I hope I'm going to put the link. Give me 1 second. I will put the link here on the chat so you can share that, take a look at what we're doing, and, you know, help us help young people build those additional resiliency skills. So that's all I have. We do have one more parent panel in December. We're going to talk about online safety. Kids coming home either from college or our high schoolers, you know, having some downtime over the holiday break. You know, there's the internet can be a scary space. So we've got some national folks, we've got some local folks who are going to be participating in the conversation on how to keep our young people safe online. So thank you again. I'm going to go ahead and quit our recording.